we've all heard about quantum physics and read about the double slit experiences and all, experiments and all that stuff. And he's going to tell us what quantum physics really means, which is the most important thing.
That's what she says.
Right?
Well,
anyway, thank you for coming back. And is he okay? So here?
should I stand up? Or?
If you'd be closer to this mic, it would be a better picture, but it's all okay.
If you don't mind, people down there can see you a little bit.
And we have 5 people coming in online from Zoom.
We do.
Oh,
5
great.
people. Okay.
So why don't
So,
you
like,
explain
right
what you're doing?
Is this good for me to stand?
Yeah, that's fine.
And so can you tell them to stay muted, or you can?
No, they're all muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Awesome, thank you. Should I
Go ahead and start, and
Great.
go ahead and tell us what you would like us to know about you for this particular program.
Wow. Okay. Well, the first thing is that I'm not a physicist, and but I had a direct encounter with the quantum dimension in 1981, and it almost drove me totally insane. It almost killed me. It destroyed my family. I didn't have the language for what I was experiencing. I understand now that, oh my God, I had snapped out of some sort of a spell and was having a direct encounter of what we now call the quantum. And but one thing I want to go back to, I was joking when I said, oh, I'm really excited to hear what's going to come out of my mouth, but another part of me was not joking, because to talk about something like quantum physics, maybe some people can have a really prepared talk. That's not interesting, at least to me. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is, to talk about quantum physics, what I've discovered in myself is that, for me, I can't project this on anyone else, but it really has to do with kind of having this direct encounter in this very moment of the quantum dimension, and not trying, but maybe the opposite, just sort of like whatever the opposite of not trying is, to let the quantum articulate itself through me. And an example with my book, when I wrote the book, and I pick it up a lot after it's been published, and I'll just open it up and start reading it, and I'll be like, wow, this is really good. Who wrote this? That's kind of what I'm talking about. It felt like that the book, that I was just sort of an instrument for something to come through, and I'm really hoping that tonight will be having something of that flavor. And so I had this experience in 1981, the spiritual awakening, and I was so excited at what I was realizing. What I was realizing was that we're having a collective dream, that we're all moment by moment dreaming up into materialization in this universe. And I was 24, so I wasn't prepared for that. I'm not sure if you can ever be prepared for that. And so in my enthusiasm and just unbelievable, ecstatic happiness at what I was realizing and what it meant, I got myself in trouble, because I hadn't figured out how to not freak people out, making them think that I was just manic or something like that. So it took me a few months to figure out how to, keep my realization to myself and to not get myself in trouble. But I knew I had experienced something. I mean, of course, everybody was trying to talk me out of my experience, and they were pathologizing me or diagnosing me or basically just, in essence, talking me out of my experience. But my experience that I was having was a direct experience, and there was nothing anybody ever said or could ever possibly say that even in one iota, would make me doubt what I was experiencing. But the problem was and I'm still in the process of integrating. What I needed was time to integrate it. It's only been, close to 40 years, and I'm still integrating it. And but then, pretty quick on, I began to, like a whole lot of us, found quantum physics actually really interesting. And the more I went down the rabbit hole of quantum physics, the more I began to understand, wow, this maps on to what I was experiencing. And so that was really interesting to me. And then at a certain point, I just went so far down the rabbit hole of quantum physics that I began to realize it was like a psychedelic. And it was a psychedelic that just kept on coming on and wouldn't stop. And it was expanding my consciousness the more I began to study what it was saying. And now the thing about quantum physics, it's really, so on the one hand, there's not a disagreement. Like everybody agrees, I think. I haven't met anybody ever who doesn't agree, you know, who's in the field, who basically says quantum physics is the greatest discovery ever in all of history in the realm of science. That there's no debate about whatsoever. What there's a debate about is, what does it mean? Because the typical physicists, they haven't, you see, what's happening in quantum physics is that all of a sudden consciousness has come into the laboratory. And the typical physicists, you know, think about it, they go to graduate school, they get their PhD, they're working for whether academia or corporations. They haven't signed on to, you know, that's not what they were really interested in, was the idea of factoring in consciousness. But consciousness was insisting. It wasn't going away. And so that's been this real question that has been offered to the physics community is, what do we do with consciousness? Now, okay, you see, because I have so many threads in my head around how to enter into this, because it's not just something that is easy to find the words to get across, to transmit what I'm trying to get across. So I'm going to take a step back. And I do Tibetan Buddhist practice. There's a particular lineage that I practice. And in this lineage, the way the teachings are kept fresh and sort of propagated so that they don't become stale or dogmatic is, it's a phenomena, it's actually called, the Tibetan is terma, okay? And terma translates as a treasure, as a hidden treasure. So now the thing is that, okay, so terma, it was started by this great enlightened being, Padmasambhava, who started all of Tibetan Buddhism. He was the founder of Tibetan Buddhism, and he cracked the code as far as, oh, wow, I can actually plant teachings or events or blessed objects in the field, in the non-local field, whether it's in the earth, in the sky, in water, or in people's minds, that he would then inspire exactly the right person who was destined to discover that terma at exactly the right time in history, exactly when that terma was needed, okay? So one way to think about what these treasures are, it's like, if you think about it just as an individual person, it's very much the way the unconscious operates. When we get one-sided and off balance, what happens? We go to sleep, we have a dream, the unconscious sends us a dream which compensates that one-sidedness, and it brings us back to who we are. Okay, that's just sort of, that's the organic, that's like, you know, just very like the psyche has a nature. That's its nature, is to just sort of continually regulate and compensate and reflect to bring us back to ourselves. So why I bring that up is because terma can be seen to be exactly the same thing when, as a species, we get off-center, we get one-sided. All of a sudden, in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, there would be, at exactly the moment when this particular teaching was needed, it would be discovered. Like I said, by the person whose fate it was to discover it. And one way of thinking about it, it was like the universe would secrete this vitamin to bring our species back, you know, to ourselves, really. And so I've actually studied terma. It's the tradition I do practice to. I'm not any authority on it at all. I'm just, you know, like I'm not an authority on physics. I'm just a curious person, but I'm very familiar with the idea of terma. And it's not a fairy tale. It's, you know, it's studied by the greatest scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's the way that the Nyingma lineage actually, you know, ensures the purity and the freshness of their teachings. That all of a sudden there'll be a teaching that somebody will just discover, and it'll be exactly what all the students, what they need to, you know, connect back with themselves. So I'm not authorized in any way, because I've had people in my life who've cited me as, oh, I've authorized them, that they've discovered a Theravada. I just, trust me, I've never done that. How could I possibly do that? But I'm familiar with the idea of Theravada. I've written articles about it. I've studied it. I do practice in that tradition. Then, as I began to study quantum physics, what began to become really clear to me, and I'm happy to say this because I don't know anybody else who's saying this, is that everything I know about Theravada and everything I know about quantum physics, I am 100% convinced, is a modern day form of a Theravada, of a spiritual treasure that we as a species have dreamed up into our world and into our minds to help us to wake up. Because in case we haven't noticed, there's a collective psychosis. It's what I spoke about when I was here a few months ago. There's a collective psychosis going on, and you know, it's just endlessly deepening, and we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet. And if that's, we're committing collective suicide. If that's not collective madness, I don't know what is. And what I'm pointing out in my work, in the quantum physics book, is that quantum physics is the medicine for the collective psychosis. And that's, as we, you know, the introduction of Theravada, and then that quantum physics is the medicine, is the cure for what ails our species. That's what I want to really explicate and try to get across tonight. Okay. Now, I think you all know that quantum physics, when it was, whether you say discovered or created, you know, the early 1900s, to say it was this radical discovery would be such an understatement. It was so beyond anything we had ever even conceived of. And it was as if that the universe that pre-quantum physics, Newtonian physics, you could call it Newtonian physics, classical physics, pre-quantum physics, the universe that classical physics was studying, quantum physics proved didn't even exist. There was no such universe. Quantum physics has proven empirically, beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt, that it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to talk about there being an objective universe. That's an idea that's sort of, whose expiration date has come, and it's antiquated. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What I'm trying to say is that quantum physics discovered that in studying, because what it's about, what quantum physics is really interested in, is what are the building blocks of this universe? What is this made out of? And the more it would inquire into the microstructure of the universe, the more, not only did it not find any actual building, any sort of material, physical building block, the more it found consciousness. And one other way of saying that is that quantum physics has discovered and absolutely proven, there's not the slightest, you know, shred of a doubt, that the act of us observing this universe influences and has an impact and has an effect on the universe observed. Okay, that's the rabbit hole. That's the portal. When my whole book is inquiring into what is that showing us? Because quantum physics is this revelation. It's a modern day revelation, and it's revealing to us exactly what we need to know to not destroy ourselves, which is what we're doing. We're destroying ourselves because we've gone collectively mad. And then, lo and behold, we've dreamed up a Theravada, a modern day spiritual treasure, through the medium of science in quantum physics. That's actually, it's revealing something to us about our creative power, the act of how we observe. So the act of observation, by saying it affects the universe observed, just let me say a few words about that. So on the one hand, there's the observer, there's the observed, and there's the act of observation. And quantum physics is saying those aren't three separate things. They're in the quantum. So quantum physics is saying this universe is quantum through and through at all scales, not just in the really small, but in the really big and in everywhere in between. That the quantum dimension pervades everything. And also another quality of the quantum world is it doesn't, it's not made of separate parts that are interacting. There's a whole sort of quality to it. There's like this seamless interconnectedness with everything else. And one of the things I point out in my book is that it's very much in alignment with the wisdom traditions, the spiritual wisdom traditions, both East and West. I'm particularly familiar with Buddhism. And so in the book, I really, point out, I quote His Holiness Dalai Lama or my teachers or just different teachings that the Buddha said that map on word for word what quantum physics has discovered. Okay. So that dynamic, that effect, the observer effect is what it's called. The act of observation actually affects the universe observed. That's the key. Because that's pointing at that the act of observation is creative. Okay, we're not just passive observers and we're like witnessing this objective world out there. Quantum physics says no, that's absolutely, if you still think that, then you're having like this hangover, you're having this classical reality hangover. The quantum world is introducing us to the act of observing by affecting the world that we're observing. Our act of observation in each and every moment, we are literally creating our experience of ourselves and of the world each and every moment. We have this incredible creative power. And that's what quantum physics, so quantum physics, for example, with all the technologies that, that have come out of quantum physics, like, with computers, atomic energy, transistors, just on and on and on, it's changed our world. And yet, the cutting edge quantum physicists are saying that's the low hanging fruit. That's 0.001% of what actually quantum physics is offering us. Now, the cutting edge quantum physicists they're convinced, they're saying, we intuit that there's like a core idea that's at the very root of what quantum physics is about, and we haven't really understood that yet. And we think that this core idea, this central idea, is unbelievably simple, it's unbelievably obvious. When we see it, when we have the realization of what quantum physics is showing us, and there are two translations. This one physicist said it a number of ways. He goes, we're either going to think, how blind have we been? The other translation, which he says the other half of the time, is how stupid have we been? And what I'm trying to point at is that central idea that quantum physics is actually showing us is the dreamlike nature of reality and our dreamlike nature. And just let me say a few words about what I mean when I say that. Because, it's one thing to say, this is like a dream. I'll just give you a little anecdote. So a number of years ago, this very eminent Tibetan translator, he was in town and he came over to have tea with me. And I think it was the first time we had met. We've met a bunch of times. But anyways, he was saying, and he's translated all of the, the really profound Tibetan texts. And he was saying that, the Buddha Dharma, the teachings are saying that this is, that this being a dream, that it's a metaphor, that it's not really, this isn't really a dream, but it's sort of like in a metaphorical way, like a dream. And we kind of got into a fight, a friendly fight. And I was saying, no, I couldn't, I don't agree at all. Totally disagree. And it was based on my experience in 1981, because that showed me that this isn't metaphorically like a dream. this is a dream. This is nothing other than a dream that we are collectively dreaming up, that we have this genius power, this incredible creative power. But because so many of us are unconscious of it, that creative, the genius that's our nature gets turned against us in a way that not only isn't serving us, but is imprisoning us and killing us. Now, to say this is like a dream, let me just say a few words about that. Because on one hand, well, it's like a dream in that it's impermanent. Everything is changing every moment. And it's also like a dream in, like quantum physics is pointing out, that the forms of this universe are inseparable from our mind, from our consciousness. Because one of the things about quantum physics, it actually, that the boundary, the barrier, the distinction between physical matter and consciousness, quantum physics just evaporates that boundary. And it literally shows that you can't separate out the opposites, mind and matter. That they interpenetrate so fully, you can't even talk about two separate entities that are interacting. But quantum physics is actually telling us, it's showing us that they're actually indistinguishable. Okay, that there's a deeper continuum that we are all contained in and informed by and a part of and expressions of, in which mind and matter are not separate, and we're not separate from that continuum. Now, one way, now think about a dream. If you're in a dream, right, what is a dream? It's your inner process that's actually dreamed up and projected out seemingly outside of yourself, in, as, and through the dreamscape. And if you don't know that you're in a dream, you're going to be entranced by the forms of the dream. And you're going to react to them as if they're other than you. You're going to be conditioned by your reactions. And you're going to be entranced by the power of your own mind. If you're in a dream and don't recognize you're dreaming, you're going to be conditioned and, you know, by what's happening in the dream in a way that's actually not serving your nature. So in a dream, the outer forms of the dream are actually reflections inseparable from what's going on inside of our mind. Okay, that's a sort of very simple way of describing a dream. Now, if we can invoke the imagination, the creative imagination for a second. So, if you're in a dream and you're holding a particular perspective, right? Now, keeping in mind that a dream is nothing other than your own mind, right? It's your psyche, just, you know, projected outside of yourself. And keep on, when I say psyche, I mean, the way I'm using it is a totality of both the conscious and the unconscious. And so if we hold a viewpoint in a dream, the dream has no choice but to reflect back our viewpoint. So if we change our viewpoint, the dream has no choice but to instantaneously shapeshift and reflect back our change in viewpoint, because the dream is nothing other than our own mind being reflected back to itself. But what happens if we're not awake to that dynamic? We hold a viewpoint in a dream and think about the dream being this dream. And then the whole dreamscape will shapeshift and completely reflect back our perspective, which then, if we're not awake to that we're dreaming, we then interpret as evidence, confirming the objective truth of our viewpoint. And once we then become entrenched in that objective truth that we're seeing correctly, because now we have evidence, the dream is offering us evidence that our perspective is correct, then we become even more entrenched and fixed in that viewpoint. So then the dream has no choice but to offer us more evidence confirming that viewpoint. That process happens both over time and in no time, outside of time, atemporally. And guess what? We've entranced ourselves. We've literally hypnotized ourselves by our creative genius for how we invoke reality. Okay? That's our situation. That's what, when you study, like, you know, whether it's, you know, night dreams or waking dreams, you can really get insight into that. Now, quantum physics is showing us that, is literally showing us that. The way that the physicist sets up their experiments and interprets the data and the questions they ask, all of that determines the answers they get back. Okay, for example, if a quantum physicist is seeing the world made of fragmented entities that are interacting, they will ask questions, interpret data, set up the experiment, the whole thing, in a way that will reinforce their viewpoint of that there are actually separate fragmented entities interacting. And so quantum physics is actually revealing this process to us. Because quantum physics, so it's unlocked the power of the atom with atomic energy. The founding fathers of quantum physics, the real cutting edge physicists, are saying that's like the palest reflection, that atomic energy that's been, comes out from the atom as it's unlocked. That's the palest reflection of the creative energy that quantum physics can unlock in our psyches. That's what it's reflecting back. Because it's showing us that moment by moment, through the act of observation, through the act of how we interpret our experience, place meaning on our experience, we are agents, we are participating in creating our experience. But if we're asleep to that, we then are just experiencing ourselves as just being passive and victimized by this outer objective reality. So it's just so interesting because not being a physicist, and I've spoken to physicists, and they said to me that I'm really fortunate in that being an outsider, maybe I haven't been sort of programmed in the way that a lot of physicists are, and also I think, probably a whole lot of you know that it's a dangerous thing in the corporate academic physics world to talk about consciousness. Because, physicists, they've lost their funding, they've lost their tenure, they all of a sudden become seen as crazy or like, mystics, in a negative way. Now, and quantum physics, it sounds really esoteric, but the founding fathers of quantum physics and the cutting edge quantum physicists are saying each one of us, we actually experience the quantum dimension way more than we experience the classical dimension. And we experience it every moment of our day in relationships. And I'll actually, share an example that happened to me. So one day, so I was in this relationship, this long-term relationship, and my girlfriend and I, we had just broken up, but we were still in the same house together that we were living in, and I was asleep. It was early in the morning, and she wanted to ask me a question. And we were in our process of really, it can get kind of gnarly when you're breaking up at certain points. And thankfully, we become good friends. But this was a long time ago, and she was afraid of the answer that I was going to give to her question. And here I am, totally asleep, and she came to me with this fear that I wasn't going to give her what she wanted in answering her question. And she woke me up by asking me this question, but she invoked the part of me. She was so afraid I was going to say, I wasn't going to give her what she wanted, that literally she woke up the part of me that was going to say, sorry, I wasn't going to go for it or whatever. I didn't forget what the content was, but it was so interesting. Once she woke up that part of me that didn't answer the question the way she wanted, of course, that confirmed to her, oh, well, of course, I knew Paul wouldn't answer that question the way I wanted because that's who Paul is or whatever. So then by me manifesting that way, that actually concretized in her mind, that was who I actually was. So then she would relate to me more in that negative way, and then that would invoke the negative part of me, which would serve as evidence. And of course, I was probably doing the same thing to her in my own way. But like, you know, why I tell that story is that if she had been, you know, maybe able to just to ask the question in a different way, it would have another part of me, because it's like we have we're like this multiplicity of selves. It could have been that this other part of me would have gotten invoked that would have given her what she wanted. And what I'm pointing at is that in being in relationship, we're always doing that. We're always like, you know, certain aspects of us are getting dreamed up. Like, you know, another example is like, you know, there are certain people who really see our light and really appreciate us and see our beauty. And we notice when we're around them, wow, we tend to manifest in such a beautiful way. And it's not that it's a causality thing, like they're causing us, but by them holding us in, you know, in light in a really high way, it's actually increasing the probability that we'll be able to step into that very light. And the more we then step into that light, the more that confirms to them that is who we really are. And then if we're doing the same thing to them, you know, then we've created this beautiful friendship, right? But the opposite is also true. If you're around people who maybe they haven't dealt with their own shadow, and they then see you as embodying a particular aspect of their unconscious shadow, so they'll project onto you and they'll like focus on that darker part of you that, yeah, we all have a shadow, right? So say even if that shadow in us is like a small percentage, they will see you as being, as all of who you are, that shadow. And of course, the more they see you that way, not in a causality way, but they're making it more probable that that's the part of you that's going to manifest that shadowy aspect. And as soon as you do, that then confirms to them the correctness of their perspective, that you really are this like demon or bad guy or whatever. So they get more entrenched in their viewpoint, and then, you know, that doesn't sound like the sort of relationship that any of us would like to have, but I think that happens. The point is that just by having relationships with each other, what quantum physics is showing us, and I think it's the biggest chapter in the book that I've written, is all about how quantum physics is showing up in everyday stuff that we just don't notice. But we're so familiar with it all the time, but we don't have the language for it, and it's happening sort of unconsciously. But when you become conscious of the quantum sort of dimension of experience, then all of a sudden a person can tap into that dimension in a way that's actually sort of on our side and helping us and of service to our evolution. Now, quantum physics is also saying so many interesting things. I mean, it's such a mind blower, because it's basically pointing out that each and every moment, this cosmos, the whole universe, is refreshing itself anew each and every moment. So like that chair, that's not the same chair this second that it was the second before. It's like, you know, rematerializing, and it will appear, because we don't have the perceptual apparatus to see the change, it would appear like it's a solid chair just existing all the time. But quantum physics is saying that no, at each and every moment, that chair and each one of us and the whole universe is refreshing itself anew. Okay? But because we can't see that, we then impute onto that a solidity, you know, which actually becomes an obscuration, because then we actually think that this world is solid, and we react to it as if it's solid, and then it will shapeshift and reflect back to us as if it's solid. And then we've entranced ourselves by the power of our own mind. That's what quantum physics is shedding light on, okay? So one other thing, there are so many things to go into about it, how so tricky quantum physics is. Quantum physics is pointing out, as is Tibetan Buddhism, that this world we live in, not only is it not solid, But, okay, here we are in Vancouver, Portland area, and so often there's like rain, and there'll be this rainbow after, beautiful sunny day, it'll rain, and oh wow, there's a beautiful rainbow. Quantum physics and the Buddha himself both say, yeah, this universe is like a rainbow. And what they mean, when you think about what is the name, when you have this rainbow, what is it composed of? And it's composed of three things. There has to be, there's water, light, and a human mind. There's no objective rainbow out in the sky. The image of a rainbow appears inside of our minds. Now, the quantum physicists are saying that's the nature of the physical world. There's nothing objective separate from us out there, that what we're seeing is actually inside of our minds, that we're actually inside of our psyche right now, as if we're having a dream. That's what quantum physics is saying. Now, if we see, if it rains and there's this rainbow out there, and if we all look and see it, we're not seeing the same rainbow. We're seeing, if there are 30 of us, we're seeing 30 private rainbows because we're each at a different angle, okay? There's no objective rainbow in the same way there's no objective world. And what quantum physics is saying is that because we each have our own private rainbow, the idea, if you think about what's happening in the world, so much of the conflict of what's happening in the world are people are fighting over that their perception of reality is the truth, and they go to war. Well, quantum physics is saying, but there is no true reality that we each have, and it's not that that there's an objective world out there and we're just seeing it through our subjective filter. That's not what quantum physics is saying. Quantum physics is saying, no, there is no objective world out there. There's something out there from this point of view, but you can't say it's objective. And it's not just that we're seeing it through our subjective filter. No, but we're each seeing our own private, just like a rainbow, our own private world. And yet we're somehow interfacing in a way where there's an agreement that we've actually, kind of a consensus reality that we've agreed to, that things exist in a certain way, and there's convenience to that. Now, quantum physics is basically saying it's expanding the realm of the possible to unimaginable degrees, okay? And that was one of the things that happened to me in 1981. Stuff began happening. It wasn't just like synchronistic. It was stuff that was completely, utterly, totally physically impossible. That was happening. And it would particularly happen when I would be around, I was finding my teachers, and I would be around these great enlightened teachers. And it seemed that there was some sort of correlation. Whenever I would hang out with them and be in their field, it was like the space-time continuum would just warp or torque, or something would happen, and stuff would happen, like I was saying, that was physically, or at least I had thought was physically impossible. Stuff would happen that could only happen in a dream. And it was, for a 24-year-old kid, this was really, I hadn't signed up for this. I mean, I wasn't prepared for it. I don't think anybody could be prepared for that. I got so excited, and that's what got me in trouble, because I was wanting to share the good news. Now, I just want to, so I'm going to be, not linear, because I want to not forget stuff. Quantum physics, and I say this in my book, quantum physics, it is the philosopher's stone, the holy grail, the second coming, whatever phrase you want to use. It's the good news. We should all be on the rooftops just screaming that there's been this game-changing discovery that's the solution to like the myriad world crises, and it's through the realm of science in quantum physics. Now, to give you an example of what I mean, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If anything, I'm not being strong enough. So in showing, in proving, empirically proving that there's no such thing as an objective world separate from our mind, that has this, there's like this corollary to that. Because once you really inquire into the nature of the objective universe and you discover it doesn't exist in the way we've been imagining it does, if we've been imagining it exists objectively, as an object separate from ourselves, once you see through that illusion and you realize, wow, this universe doesn't exist objectively, well, what happened to the subject? Us. We can only be a subject if there's an object to be in relationship to. But when all of a sudden you see through the object and you realize it doesn't exist separate from your own mind, it doesn't exist objectively from its own side. It has no intrinsic, independent existence. This is what Buddhism, this is like the main tenet of all of Buddhism, emptiness. Emptiness is like, what it means is like that anything has no intrinsic, independent, objective existence, okay? For example, I only exist, I can think I exist as a self, encapsulated entity, but I actually, when you really inquire into this, and this is true for all of us, I only exist, I have relationship with all of you, and with the trees, and with the sky, and with the whole universe. But say I only exist in relationship to another person, but they don't exist as an independent, objective, intrinsically existing objective entity. They exist relative to someone else or to the rest of the cosmos. And that someone else doesn't exist independently, intrinsically, objectively. Everything exists relative to each other. There's no separation. If you remember, that's what I was saying. The quantum dimension, there's no separate parts. There's no separate anything. There's no things. It's all seamlessly interconnected wholeness. So seeing through that idea, because it's just an idea in our mind that the world exists objectively, when you really get that, it really puts into question, wait a second, then who am I? If there's no object, who is the subject? I need an object to be in a relationship to. So all of a sudden, you see, so quantum physics, and keep in mind what I'm about to say, this is the physicist's worst nightmare or highest dream. I can't tell. Quantum physics has promoted itself to become a spiritual tradition. Because it's actually pointing back to us who we are. That we have this enormous, undreamed of, unimaginable creative power to not only transform ourselves, but to transform our world. And this isn't some sort of new age gobbledygook. This is actually hard science. This is like being offered to us by quantum physics. And, the typical physicists, at least from what I know, they're not trained to like sort of unpack, sort of like a dream. You have a dream and it's speaking symbolically. We have to develop symbolic, sort of awareness, or you have to be able to be fluent in the language of, if you're having a dream, well, the language of symbols. In the same way, I'm kind of interpreting, and quantum physics is a completely 100% symbolic procedure, by the way. All the physicists are saying that. And symbols are the language of dreams. So all that I'm coming in as an outsider, if I get a physics book and there's equations, I put it back. I don't read it. That's not my thing. I'm interested in what is the meaning of this. The founding fathers were saying, this is like even Einstein himself. Now, Einstein was one of the creators of quantum physics, and it so freaked him out, he took it to his grave. He couldn't embrace what quantum physics was showing us. Because he was attached by his writings, it's clear that there was an actual objective world out there that science was studying. He couldn't let go of that notion. So his biographer was saying, quantum physics was talk about like Einstein had this this thing like a demon. That's what he called it. Quantum physics was the demon. That he thought about quantum physics way more than he thought about relativity theory, and he just couldn't wrap his mind around it. But Einstein said something. He goes, quantum physics is so uncommonly, and this is a quote, is so uncommonly important, it should be everyone's concern. Okay, and other quantum physicists are saying the fact that that most people don't know, like how amazing, like somebody in the intro said, oh, quantum physics is amazing. Absolutely, that people don't know how amazing it is. It's a tragedy. It's a pity that not more of us know what quantum physics is actually about. And one quantum physicist actually says that when he gets really in despair and depressed, there are two things that are his go-to. One is he's into like Beethoven or Mozart, or I forget which one, and then quantum physics. That those are his two antidepressants. You know, and because quantum physics, by expanding the realm of the possible. So okay, here's one way of understanding that, a real practical way. So you have a quantum entity that before it's observed, it exists in a state of any possible way it could manifest. It exists in all of those potentialities simultaneous, but in potential, right? And the moment that we observe it, one of those possibilities actualizes, and all the others, they disappear as if they never existed. And that's the one, and that's the universe we find ourselves in. What quantum physics is saying is that even if one of those potentialities is, and this is a quote, highly, ridiculously unlikely, it could still manifest. It could be this very moment the way this universe manifests. So you get a sense of what I'm saying, that it expands the realm of the possible. And to give like an actual example, so here we are as a species, and we're like hell-bent on destroying ourselves in so many ways. Nuclear war, climate change, war with Iran, just, you know, the 5G net, it just goes on and on. And, but the possibility that there could be enough human beings that actually awaken to their quantum nature, which is an equivalent term to their Buddha nature, and can become quantum activists and can connect with other people who are also awakening to their quantum nature and put their realization together and discover, well, we can actually change the dream, change the waking dream, that's evolutionary. That is highly, ridiculously unlikely. But if we're not actually imagining that that could happen, then what are we thinking? Then we're part of the problem, okay? That's possible. The fact that our species could actually evolve and wake up and avert catastrophe. Quantum physics is saying, yeah, it's ridiculously highly unlikely, and it's possible. It could be the very universe that we actually dream into materialization this moment. And if somebody is like, you know, taking issue with that and saying, no, 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 well, I would really be interested to talk to them about that, because I would point out, well, it seems to me like you're coming from a viewpoint that seems kind of having these, you know, fetters and these blinders on it. It's a limiting viewpoint. Because being like a dream, okay, I'm just going to go back and then I'll get to the dream. If you remember about the terma, the hidden treasure tradition. So an example of a terma, an actual specific terma, there's a Tibetan book that's a terma was discovered centuries after it was authored by Padmasambhava. Then he hid it, and then the person who was discovered to find it found it. And it says something in the treasure, and I've essentialized what it says into 4 words. And the 4 words are sort of the equation for how we create reality. And the 4 words are, as viewed, so appears. That's the actual essentialization of this whole terma. As viewed, so appears. Now, if you just for a minute, just imagine in a dream. As you view the dream, instantaneously, in no time, it doesn't take 1 second or a half a second, it takes no time at all. The moment you view the dream a certain way, the dream, being nothing other than your own mind reflecting back to itself, has no choice but to reflect back your viewpoint. As viewed, so appears. Okay. Now, if somebody hears this Dharma, this teaching, as view so appears, and goes, oh, that's BS. Well, guess what? The whole universe will shapeshift and reflect back to them that as view so appears is BS. And now they have evidence. You see, now I can prove that it's BS because look, I have the evidence without realizing the evidence that they're citing to prove that as view so appears is actually BS. Actually is the opposite. It's actually proving the profundity of as view so appears, but they become entranced by the power of their own mind, you know? So what quantum physics, oh, it's funny, I should just show you, somebody gave me this t-shirt. Let's see, I wore it on purpose. I don't know if people can read this.
Of course.
Well, I can't, so maybe somebody could read it.
Science is what?
Science is real.
Except for quantum physics, that shit is witchcraft.
Yeah.
That's the last
That shit is witchcraft.
I can say the louder, do the punchline again. Say it more slowly.
Science is real, except for quantum physics, that shit is witchcraft.
That shit is witchcraft.
Oh, okay, got it.
Because what that means, at least in my interpretation, is that, and keep in mind the quantum physicists themselves, when you read like, you know, the founding fathers, they're talking about an evil spell or the 13, certain fairy tales where they'll talk about, you know, whatever, just curses and spells. So they're talking about this type of thing. And you know, that's not what they signed up for. But the point is that we ourselves are complicit and participating in putting ourselves under a spell. If we think that this universe objectively exists, written in stone, well, then the whole universe is going to manifest. The quantum physicists will even say, yeah, there'll be this billboard campaign all over the universe reflecting back that it's objective. If we then think of it as being objective, and then we become entranced by the power of our creativity in a way we're killing ourselves. So there is something like some sort of like witchcraft or spell that you know, like when you study the writings of the quantum physicists, they're just like, they continually talk about, yeah, there's like this, whatever, like magic, there's magic. Quantum physics is magic. It's like a magical act. And so the idea that we can actually wake up to whatever degree, and it continually, you know, just like in Buddhism, they'll say, like His Holiness Dalai Lama will say, yeah, you know, I'm always increasing my altruism. I'm always enlarging my compassion. It's the same thing. We're always deepening our realization, you know, of our quantum nature. And, but it's particularly interesting when you hang out with other people who are also doing that. And this is in Buddhism, they'll talk about the jewels, the 3 jewels, the support for enlightenment, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, teacher, teaching, and the community. That it's really important who you hang out with. If you hang out with people who are asleep, who are entranced, it's contagious. And it affects your unconscious in a way, and you begin to, like, you know, see in that way. But when you hang out with people who are really awakening and who are tapping into their intrinsic creative nature, because that's in essence what quantum physics is showing us, that that we're creative beings. We're made in the image of God, of the creative God, of the creator God. That's, you know, from my point of view, what that means is that we have this incredible creativity. So one image that these physicists are using, this one physicist in particular says, imagine if you've never seen a car, right, an automobile, and you come across this car, and you have no idea what it's for. And okay, so you turn on the signal, you turn on the radio, you turn on the light, turn on the air conditioning. He says, yeah, all of that's great, but you still haven't figured out what is the actual purpose of the car. He says, that's like us with quantum physics. We've developed unbelievable technologies that have changed the course of history, but we haven't figured out what is, remember I'm saying the essential idea that when we see it, we're going to be like, how could I have been so blind? How could I have been so stupid? And what I'm pointing out is that, well, as an outsider, as somebody who's not a physicist, but just a curious person, quantum physics is actually, it's pointing at the dreamlike nature, it's an expression of the dreamlike nature, and it's actually the portal that actually is bringing us to the dreamlike nature, okay? So if you think about that, quantum physics, it's actually, when you interpret it in the way that I'm like pointing out, you begin to realize, wow, it's like showing us the dreamlike nature, but it's simultaneously an expression of the very thing it's showing us, okay?